Hi, my name is Jenny Feick. Welcome to the sixth in a series of educational videos for the Great Divide Trail Association. This is the second of 4 videos on the fauna or animals of the Great Divide. This one covers the largest phylum of invertebrates, the arthropods. It is thus the longest video in the series. The Great Divide Trail Association is committed to reconciliation, which starts by taking this and every opportunity to acknowledge our honor and privilege to live, work, and play within Treaty 7 territory. We honor and acknowledge that the GDT passes through to traditional Indigenous territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Stoney Ayahe Nakota, the Tsutsina, Cree, Chiwepma, Tlaitlai Dina, the Tanaha, the Sinixt, and Métis. The Great Divide Trail Association would like to invite you to advocate for what you love and to preserve nature for future generations to enjoy, while educating yourselves and others on Indigenous history and perspective. This video is the 6th in a series of natural history-oriented presentations called The Nature of the Great Divide. And this particular Nature of the Great Divide talk focuses on an important group of invertebrate animals that you will for sure encounter along the Great Divide, the arthropods. This is another group of tiny but mighty organisms that have a huge effect despite their small size. Before I get going into the presentation, I'll just share a bit about my background. I have a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Biology with a minor in Geography, Physical Geography, a Master's in Environmental Science, and a PhD in Natural Resources Geography, and all of those are from the University of Calgary. During my 25-year coast-to-coast career with Parks Canada, I worked first as a park naturalist in Mount Revelstoke and Glacier, Waterton Lakes, and Kootenay National Parks, and then in many other positions in planning, research, and management in both Western and Atlantic regions. Then from 2000 to 2012, I managed various programs for the British Columbia provincial government, specifically in the Ministry of Environment. And these included habitat protection, terrestrial ecosystem science, stewardship outreach, climate change adaptation for nature, and environmental policy. I retired from full-time government work in 2012, and my husband, wildlife biologist Ian Hatter, and I now live in Invermere, British Columbia. In terms of my connection with the Great Divide Trail and the Great Divide Trail Association, I was one of the so-called original 6 on the Project Great Divide Trails crew in 1974, who surveyed a route between Waterton Lakes and Banff National Parks. I was one of the founders of the first iteration of the Great Divide Trail Association, a past board member for several years, and for one term past president. I have hiked a lot of the GDT in sections over the years, although Wilmer Wilderness Park is as far north as I've gone so far. When the GDTA was resurrected in 2013, I rejoined and started volunteering on trail work parties and also writing articles for the GDTA's Pathfinder newsletter. And lastly, I am the compiler and editor of both the first edition and the second edition of Tales from the Great Divide, vignettes on the origins and early history of Canada's Great Divide Trail and Great Divide Trail Association. And this is really a self-published compendium of stories from all the various individuals involved firsthand in the start and development of the GDT and the GDTA. Here's what I will cover in this talk. I'll outline where invertebrates, especially the arthropods, fit within the hierarchy of life, biodiversity, and the animal kingdom. I'll explain where arthropods live in the Great Divide area and their ecological roles. I'll spend most of the time describing the different types of arthropods that you could encounter in the vicinity of the Great Divide, including crustaceans, myriapods, arachnids, and hexapods. Ticks are a type of arachnid, and insects are included in the hexapods. So this talk will provide information on how to deal with ticks and some of the biting insects while on the Great Divide Trail. I'll wrap up with some suggestions on safeguarding nature along the GDT. Going back to the hierarchy of life diagram that I've shown in preceding videos in this series, in this, the video just before this one, and also in the next two videos, I will be discussing members of the animal kingdom, the fauna that live in the vicinity of the Great Divide. When one considers the diversity of life on Earth, its biodiversity, the contribution of invertebrates, and in particular, the arthropods, is enormous. Taken as a whole, invertebrates constitute 80% of the Earth's species and over 95% of all animal species. And over 70% of the planet's species are arthropods, and over 80% of all animal species are arthropods. Arthropods constitute pervasive elements of every food web. Arthropods are herbivores, predators, prey, parasites, and detrivores or decomposers. The Rocky Mountains are less biodiverse than places like coastal temperate rainforests, but there is still a greater percentage of arthropods than any other group of animal species there. By far, most animal species on the planet are classified as invertebrates. Animals that lack a backbone or spinal column comprised of vertebrae containing a spinal cord or nerve. The other group of animals are the ones we are most familiar with, the creatures with backbones, the vertebrates. They are the subject of future videos in this series. Invertebrates are soft-bodied, although most arthropods, including insects, spiders, and crustaceans, have exoskeletons, and mollusks develop shells to protect themselves. No invertebrates have lungs. They respire through their skin. And arthropods, as well as some mollusks, specifically the snails and clams, have simple, open circulatory systems containing what's called hemolymph. And this fluid functions like a combination of the blood and lymph fluid found in vertebrate animals. As I have mentioned in previous videos, in the vicinity of the Great Divide, we have these two different groups of invertebrates. The ones I covered in the last video, the three different types of worms, as well as the freshwater mollusks, and the arthropods, the crustaceans, the myriapods, the arachnids, and the hexapods. And I'll get into more detail about what are in each of those four groups later on. As I've mentioned in previous videos, in the vicinity of the Great Divide, it's altitude that creates the three main vegetation zones. Animals have the advantage of being able to move across these different vegetation zones. Nevertheless, you can and will encounter different arthropod species at different elevations. Due to the harsher weather conditions that are up high in the mountains, it gets increasingly difficult for arthropods, like other animals, to survive the higher up a mountain that you go. The most species tend to live in the valleys and on the lower slopes of the montane zone. Fewer species are found in the subalpine forest zone, and the fewest species are found way up in the alpine tundra. Nevertheless, there are more arthropods in the alpine zone than there are vertebrates. Even though there are fewer species of arthropods up in the mountains, the ones that do survive can be very numerous, depending on the time of year and microclimatic conditions. Biting insects tend to be most noticeable near moist meadows, as well as in sheltered forests near shallow meandering rivers in spring and early to midsummer, especially when the air is still with no wind. The peak of the wildflower bloom is another time of year when insect abundance increases. Pollinators emerge to take advantage of the rich nectar in the wildflowers. In the process, they benefit the plants by aiding in their reproduction. Even time of day makes a difference, in particular to how many insects we notice. The same campsite can be free of biting flies in the morning and filled with their presence in the evening. Arthropods inhabit all terrestrial habitats within the Great Divide area, from the soil under the forests, meadows, or alpine tundra, to the trees, shrubs, forbs, and grasses that grow there. Some can fly to move between habitats, while others crawl, jump, or scurry about. Arthropods also live in all aquatic habitats along the GDT, including flowing water habitats, rivers and streams, and in and on water bodies, lakes and ponds. Some species even exist on the snow. When one considers the diversity of life on Earth, its biodiversity, it really is incredible how many are arthropods and the incredible different roles that arthropods play in ecosystem processes, particularly in the physical, chemical, and biological processes that link organisms and their environment, such as food web dynamics. Certain arthropods prey on other species. Others have symbiotic relationships with other species in the same habitats. They parasitize plants or other animals, either invertebrates or vertebrates. Many arthropods have relationships with other organisms that are mutually beneficial, called mutualism, or one benefits and the other is neither harmed nor benefited by the interaction, called commensalism. A symbiotic relationship that has been studied intensively concerns bark beetles and fungi. All of the many different species of bark beetle carry different species of fungi with them. Wood colonizing fungi all benefit by being transported to trees by the beetles. However, the relationships vary in their effects on the bark beetles. Some benefit beetles by neutralizing the chemical defenses of the trees against the beetles, or providing nutrients for the beetles or their larvae. Other fungal hitchhikers have negative effects on the beetles, and some species have no effect at all. In the case of the mountain pine beetle, it carries one species of fungus that helps it nutritionally, and another that prevents the tree from making the toxic sap or pitch that can kill the beetle. Communities of fungi associated with bark beetles are diverse and dynamic. Many have likely been shaped and fine-tuned by long periods of co-evolution. Arthropods aid in biogeochemical and nutrient cycling, energy flow within ecosystems, and soil formation. all of which support the continuance of life on Earth. They play a key role in decomposing both plants and animals, and this adds valuable organic matter and nutrients to the thin, poor mineral soil in the Rockies. Play this little clip for you. A vital ecosystem service many arthropods provide is the act of pollination, the transfer of pollen from the anthers or male reproductive parts of a plant to the stigma or female reproductive parts of a plant, later enabling fertilization and the production of seeds so that the plant can reproduce. Without pollination, nearly all crops and flowering plants would cease to exist, with dire consequences for life on Earth. And although bees are certainly important pollinators, not all pollinators are bees. And so here you can see different types of pollinators. And it's kind of interesting that you'll see a variety of different insects being pollinators. The one up on the left, most people think of is a bee when they see and they hear it, but it's just a common drone fly along the GDT between Flow Lake and Yuma Pass in this case. The one to its right is a white-shouldered bumblebee, which was along the shore of Waterton Lake. And then below that is a yellow velvet beetle that was right along the GDT north of Coleman. And the last one there on the lower left is a Mormon fritillary butterfly on an aster in the Tucara Meadows along the Skyline Trail in Jasper National Park, Alberta. The arthropods are the largest phylum in the animal kingdom, as I mentioned, and in the Rockies, there are believed to be more than 20,000 species of arthropods. I'll spend most of the rest of this video describing the ones that you could see along the GDT. In the vicinity of the Great Divide, there are subphylums, 4 of them, within the arthropods, and these are the crustaceans, which includes things like water fleas, isopods, freshwater shrimp, as well as an invasive alien crayfish. The myriapods, which includes the millipedes and centipedes. The arachnids, which includes spiders, mites, and ticks. And the hexapods, which includes the springtails and insects. Within the arthropods, you are most likely to notice certain insects, spiders, and ticks. However, before we get into talking about them, first I will tell you about some of the tiny crustaceans and myriapods that live in the Great Divide area. Once you know about them, you might be more likely to notice some as you hike the GDT. Water fleas, or Daphne, are tiny crustaceans that live in fresh water. Their name stems from their jumpy-looking swimming style, accomplished by using a second set of antennae. Daphne are filter feeders. They consume small, suspended particles of algae, protists, and bacteria in the water. Their food is gathered with the help of a filtering apparatus consisting of flattened, leaf-like legs that produce water currents. In turn, they are fed upon by aquatic invertebrates, fish, and amphibians, so they are a foundational species in aquatic food webs. You might also see isopods, commonly known as woodlice, sow bugs, or pill bugs. Some isopods eat dead or decaying plant and animal matter, and others they just graze, or they're filter feeders. A few of them are predators, and some are internal or external parasites, mostly on fish. Aquatic species live on the bottom of freshwater bodies of water, and terrestrial isopods move around by crawling. They tend to be found in cool, moist places like under rocks. Some species can roll themselves into a ball as a defense mechanism or to conserve moisture. The populations of most isopods were eliminated during the Ice Age, and the only ones you are likely to see are the ones associated with human settlements in places like Waterton, the Crow's Nest Pass, Field, Banff, and Jasper. There is an extremely rare species of native isopod in the Rockies that is only found in springs inside high elevation caves. And it is believed to be a relic of populations that existed before the Ice Age. Isopods today resemble a creature from long ago. Trilobites are a group of extinct marine arthropods that first appeared long before the first isopod, around 521 million years ago, shortly after the beginning of the Cambrian period. Trilobites persisted, living through the majority of the Paleozoic era, and they were on Earth for 300 million years. They thus overlapped when isopods first appeared in the fossil record during the Carboniferous period of the Paleozoic era, some 300 million years ago. Like isopods and other arthropods, trilobites possess a head, thorax, and tail. Exceptionally preserved, trilobites also show legs and antennae. You can see some amazing trilobite fossils if you go on a guided walk on Mount Stephen above Field, BC. Just be sure to book in advance. The two types of freshwater shrimp, or amphipods, that you might see in aquatic habitats in the vicinity of the Great Divide are Gammarus and Hyela. The most common is Gammarus, especially the lacustrine scud, pictured here from two locations. Where they exist, freshwater shrimp are the most important source for food source for trout in mountain lakes. They are generally scavengers, feeding on plant and animal material that has settled to the bottom of the pond. On occasion, they prey on injured or stressed aquatic vertebrates that are smaller than them. They tend to hide among the aquatic plants and under rocks or other debris when not traveling or mating. One usually sees them in water less than 10 meters deep. Shrimp need calcium to build their shells or exoskeletons. In the Rockies, lower elevation mountain lakes that don't have pond lilies they tend to be the ones that are high in dissolved salts and calcium, and those are the lakes that support the most amphipods. As far as I know, the only freshwater crayfish that has been found in the vicinity of the Great Divide is the northern or virile crayfish, which is provincially designated as an aquatic invasive alien species of concern in Alberta. On August 26, 2022, Parks Canada received a tip from a park visitor that they had seen crayfish near Bow Lake in Banff National Park. Parks Canada staff captured the one pictured here near a stream flowing into Bow Lake, stating that it was the first time they've seen this species so far upstream in the Bow River or in any of the mountain national parks. It was likely introduced by someone fishing and using crayfish as bait. There are no native crayfish in aquatic ecosystems within the Rocky Mountains on either the western or eastern slopes. While both millipedes and centipedes belong to the subphylum Neuriopoda, millipedes belong to the class Diplopoda, and centipedes belong to the class Chilopoda. Millipedes have long, many segmented, round bodies, and each segment has two pairs of legs. All are herbivores. Centipedes have flat bodies with long, multi-segmented bodies with one pair of legs per body segment. All are carnivorous. Species native to the Rocky Mountains were eliminated during the Pleistocene glaciations. So the only species of neuropods you are likely to see in the vicinity of the Great Divide would be under a rock in places like Waterton, Banff, or Jasper town sites, Field, or the Crow's Nest Pass. They have been brought to the area unintentionally by human beings and are not native to the region. Besides crustaceans and myriapods, the phylum Arthropoda includes arachnids, spiders, ticks, and mites, all of which have 8 legs. All spiders are predatory and female dominated. The most common spiders you will see scurrying across the trail in summer or winter are the different species of wolf spiders, which, although are large enough to notice, they do not bother people. You may also see the tiny flower crab spiders hunting their insect prey on wildflowers in late spring and throughout the summer, or right up by tree line, sitting in the middle of a perfect classic spider web strung between boulders. You might see a carbonary or a weaver. Sometimes you don't actually see the spider, but you see evidence. And this is especially true for the species of spiders that make webs either near the ground or up in the air. It is also true for another type of arachnid, mites. These creatures suck on the cell contents of plant leaves to get the carbohydrates that plants make through photosynthesis. Many mites tend to go after deciduous, broadleaf plants such as Rocky Mountain maple, poplar, aspen, birch, and willow. The plants react, producing abnormal growths called galls or spots of discoloration on the leaves. The actual mites are often too small for the human eye to see. Then there's also the western predatory mite that feeds on the eggs, larvae, and adult mites that attack plants, keeping their populations in check. Other species of mites are parasites on other invertebrates and vertebrates, including many species that live on or near birds and mammals. Most are relatively harmless, living on dead skin and other detritus in the nest or den of the animal. However, sometimes mange infections in deer and moose with lowered immunity levels can become more serious. And then I have to tell you a sad story. In the year 1900, people deliberately introduced the parasitic mite called the canine burrowing mite. It causes sarcoptic mange in wild canines, and it was introduced to North America deliberately as a biological control, hoping that they would eliminate wolves. Although it did not have the desired effect of eliminating wolves, the mange severely weakens individual wolves, coyotes, and red foxes, and in severe cases can lead to the death of the animal through hypothermia or bacterial infection from scratching open sores. It is contagious and also adversely affects black bears, red squirrels, raccoons, horses, household pets, and even humans. The Rocky Mountain wood tick is a small arachnid with a big and potentially dangerous bite. While it relies primarily on bighorn sheep, rodents, and other wildlife, it will also seek humans to bite. These bloodsuckers are most prevalent in the spring, so from March to June, and one has to be very careful not to let them sink their mandibles into one's soft, vulnerable flesh. Be sure to check for ticks if you have had to walk under overhanging vegetation or walk through tall grass, or even having grasses and bushes brush against your clothes. If a tick does latch onto you, you'll need to carefully extract it with tweezers or a tick card that should be in your first aid kit. Some of these ticks can carry a bacterium that causes paralysis that will go away once the tick is removed. And there is only the remote possibility of getting the fatal Rocky Mountain spotted fever from these ticks, although that is a possibility we need to be aware of. We can be thankful that the Rocky Mountain tick is not a species that carries Lyme disease. Wearing a hat and long sleeve shirt and pulling your socks up over the bottom of your hiking pants or wearing mini gaiters helps to reduce the likelihood of getting ticks on your skin. If you wear light colored clothing, it is easier to spot the dark colored ticks if they land on your clothes. And you can also spray your clothing with certain kinds of insect repellent that repel ticks. Be sure to check yourself and your traveling companions thoroughly after a hike while doing a sponge bath or taking a solar shower. Do not have the clothing you wore that day in your tent with you during tick season, as the ticks can remain hidden on the clothing and then find exposed skin during the night while you're asleep. Only a couple of the dozen or so tick species that live in the Rocky Mountain region will even bite human beings. By far, the majority feast on wildlife. Of these, the one that causes the most stress, especially for moose, is the winter tick. My husband's father, Dr. Jim Hatter, was the first to scientifically document the negative effect of the winter tick on moose populations in part of British Columbia back in 1950. Of course, Indigenous people in the area knew about the phenomenon, and Jim relied a lot on their descriptions of tick-infested moose, as well as his own extensive field investigations. The malnutrition winter tick complex that he first described is still an issue today. Hexapods are named for their most distinctive feature, a three-part body plan with a consolidated thorax and 3 pairs of legs. Most other arthropods have more than 3 pairs of legs. Besides the class Insecta, there are 3 groups of ancient wingless hexapods, the springtails, the coneheads, and 2-pronged bristletails. Of these, those in the order Columbola, the springtails, are found near the Great Divide. Springtails are fascinating ancient arthropods that have lived on Earth for 400 million years. Although nicknamed snow fleas, these minuscule critters are no cousins to the insects called fleas, which evolved a mere 200 million years ago. The only similarity the springtail and flea have in common is size. They are both 1 to 2 millimeters long. Unlike a flea, a springtail is not a parasite. Instead, springtails consume organic matter in the soil, which greatly helps with decomposition and nutrient cycling. Snow fleas live on snow, where they periodically appear in dense colonies. Their cells contain a glycine-rich antifreeze protein that helps them withstand bitterly cold temperatures. Once snow fleas sense snow is thawing, they migrate up from their mud-bound homes below the snow to feed on algae and fungi in and on the snow. They need moist conditions for survival, but can live without food for years by recycling their own waste or going dormant. I'll show you some springtails in action here. A springtail doesn't jump like a flea using its legs. It has a furcula, a tail-like appendage that catapults it nearly 100 times the length of its tiny body. Springtails come in a whole variety of different colors. Purple, red, green springtails exist. Although in the vicinity of the GDT, the ones you will most likely see in dense colonies on the snow surface are either black or yellow. And there's yet another reason not to eat yellow or black snow. Insects are also hexapods. Insects are the largest class of organisms within the arthropod phylum. Insects all have a chitinous exoskeleton, a three-part body, 3 pairs of jointed legs, compound eyes, and a pair of antennae. Most insects, like ants, bees, and grasshoppers, have clear hemolymph since they lack metal in their blood, which is what creates the color. There are many kinds of insects that you will see along the GDT. Here's a tiny sample. 2 mating, 2-striped grasshoppers, which were along the Bertha Lake Trail in Waterton Lakes National Park, a black meadowhawk dragonfly along Ochre Creek in Kootenay National Park, BC, a Mormon cricket, Waterton Lakes National Park, Alberta, a lacewing along the GDT in the headwaters of the Kananaskis River in Alberta, cottonwood leaf beetle larvae eating willow leaves near the Skyline Trail in Jasper National Park, Alberta, and a symphona fly along the Fording Pass Trail in Alberta. Although many people call all insects bugs, there is only one order of insects that are true bugs, the Hemiptera. This taxonomic group comprises over 80,000 species and includes the cicadas, aphids, plant hoppers, leaf hoppers, assassin bugs, bed bugs, stink bugs, and shield bugs. They range in size from 1 millimeter to around 15 centimeters and share a common arrangement of piercing and sucking mouthparts. Aphids are true bugs that suck the juices out of plants. A study in 1952 revealed that there are 532 different species of aphid within the Rocky Mountains of Western North America. Fortunately for the plants, from ladybird beetles to birds, many organisms prey on aphids. Aphids have developed a symbiotic relationship with ants that is a classic example of mutualism where both species benefit. Aphids provide ants with the sugar-rich honeydew that they produce after sucking on the plant juices. In return for this source of food, the ants protect the aphids against various natural enemies and improve the hygiene of the aphid colony. A true bug that we do not want to see invade the Rocky Mountains is the hemlock woolly aldegid, which is devastating hemlock forests across eastern North America, including along parts of the Appalachian Trail. It has recently appeared in the western hemlock forests on Vancouver Island and along the west coast of British Columbia. The hemlock woolly aldegid is a small aphid-like insect. All of them are female, and they can reproduce without males. So it only takes one female to start an infestation. In a year, a single female can produce thousands of offspring. In affected areas, you can find this bug on the underside of hemlock branches where it forms small cottony masses on twigs. This white, waxy wool is what gives the insect their name. It is secreted as they develop, and it shields the insects from predators and may also keep them from drying out. The wool is easy to spot by looking at the underside of hemlock twigs in the late fall, winter, and spring. Under the telltale white wool, the insects insert their feeding tubes into cells at the base of hemlock needles and feed on the carbohydrates that the plant makes, eventually starving the hemlocks of this vital energy supply. In midsummer, the insects enter a dormant, inactive state until they become active again in the fall. Beetles form the order Coleoptera. Their front pair of wings are hardened into wing cases called elytra, which distinguishes them from most other insects. The Coleoptera, with about 400,000 described species, is the largest of all of the orders, constituting almost 40% of described insects and 25% of all known animal species. Beetles are of value to humans in many ways. As predators, beetles reduce populations of problem insects, especially caterpillars. Ladybird beetles are widely known to be important predators of aphids. Beetles are prominent decomposers, especially in forests. Blapolis, a long-lived, flightless, forest-dwelling stink beetle, scavenges on plant and animal debris. It lives in rodent burrows to escape temperature extremes and stands on its head, squirting a stinky, distasteful fluid to repel its vertebrate predators. The white-spotted Sawyer beetle helps decompose dead and dying conifers, especially after a forest fire. Jewel beetles are one of the first species to lay their eggs following a forest fire. The larvae that hatch eat dead and dying branches of trees, helping to decompose the burnt trees and recolonize burnt forests. The adults, attracted to flowers when it's time to mate, help pollinate those wildflowers. Beetles lived on the planet long before species like bees, wasps, and butterflies evolved. So they're thought to have had a role in aiding pollination in ancient cycads and were among the very first pollinators of flowering plants when they evolved. Beetle-pollinated plants tend to bear heavily scented blossoms on large cup-like flowers or compound flowers that are typically open during the daytime. Although beetles have color vision, they rely primarily on their sense of smell to find flowers. Flower visiting beetles seek pollen as food, so these plants must produce enough pollen to ensure some is left over for pollination to occur. Pollen grains stick to beetle bodies as they move from flower to flower. Beetles will eat through leaves and petals to reach the pollen, so beetle-pollinated plants evolved to have thicker flowers and leaves to survive all this damage. The bodies of yellow velvet beetles are covered by a dense coat of golden hairs. The adult beetles are frequently seen feeding on flowers in the montane forest zone during the summer, and their hairy coats pick up the pollen, which is transferred to other flowers as they feed, allowing pollination. Their larvae feed on the decaying wood of trees in the poplar family. So where you see poplar trees, look around and you might see these yellow velvet beetles. While you're looking around, you may see some blister beetles also in the act of pollination. But whatever you do, don't pick them up, because when threatened, these beetles secrete a poisonous chemical that causes blistering of the skin, and that is their defense against predators. The mountain pine beetle is a native insect found in Western North America that under normal population levels plays an important role in mountain forest ecosystems, that of forest regeneration. This small beetle bores through the bark, mines the phloem, the living tissue and vascular plants that carries organic nutrients. It transports the spores of the yeast-like blue-stained fungus, which are on its mouthparts or mandibles. The beetle's eggs hatch into larvae that consume the phloem. Meanwhile, the blue-stained fungus stops water transport in the tree. In the past, prolonged cold during the winters, minus 30 degrees or colder for 3 weeks at a time, kept mountain bark beetles, their numbers in check. However, since the mid-1980s and into the 1990s, milder winters and hot, dry summers in central BC and Alberta have led to unprecedented population growth and range expansion, causing massive die-off of mature lodgepole and other pines across Western Canada and also down in the States. This is very noticeable as you hike the GDT, especially near Jasper. Here is what the view from Old Fort Point looked like in August 2018, when the pine trees were in what foresters call the red attack phase, meaning the needles have died and have turned a rusty red color because they've lost all their chlorophyll. Since then, the needles have all fallen off and the trees have turned gray. Emerald ash borers are non-native wood-boring beetles from cold parts of Eastern Asia that, unlike the native jewel beetles, feed on live wood, in their case, ash trees. Emerald ash borers have rapidly spread through North America since hitchhiking a ride on imported lumber and imported untreated wood packing material back in the late 1990s. So far, it has resulted in the loss of millions of trees in eastern North America, again affecting the Appalachian Trail area. It has been detected for the first time in Vancouver, BC in June 2024. EAB has not yet been found in Alberta, but predictions show that it could arrive in Calgary sometime in 2024. This highly destructive invasive beetle can kill up to 99% of the ash trees in the areas it invades. So it poses a serious threat to native forests on the eastern side of North America and the western side, as well as to municipal trees and nurseries. It is most commonly spread through the transportation of infected firewood and other wood products, and once moved, the adults can fly and spread locally. The good news is that our native mountain ashes and horticultural species of European mountain ash are in a different genus than true ash trees. And so far, this particular invasive alien species does not attack them. Lepidopterans are a large order of insects comprised of moths and butterflies. All lepidopterans have 4 large scale-covered wings that bear distinctive markings, and larvae that are caterpillars. One of the most obvious differences between the 2 major groups of lepidopterans, butterflies and moths, is that butterflies tend to be most active during the day, so they're diurnal, whereas moths are active at night, so they're nocturnal. Moths tend to be duller and less vibrant in color, with less intricate and striking patterns. Most moths are also stockier and have furrier bodies, whereas butterflies are smooth and lean. Moth antennae tend to be leaf or feather-shaped, whereas butterfly antennae tend to be long, bare, and they terminate in club shape. And lastly, moths rest with their wings open, whereas butterflies tend to rest with their wings closed or fan them open or closed. There's tremendous diversity of butterflies that you can see as you hike the GDT at all elevations. Some of the ones that you might see are clockwise from the upper left, the Rocky Mountain Parnassian, the green comma, the morning cloak, one of the first to emerge since it overwinters as an adult rather than migrating or dying like the other butterfly species do. The Anesia checker spot and the Mariposa copper. Here are 2 mating northern blues that I saw on the Boom Lake Trail in Banff National Park, Alberta, a red admiral on a Sitka valerian at Healy Pass in Banff National Park, Alberta, and Arctic fritillary on coyote scat. It's amazing how often you will see butterflies on scat. This was also along the Healy Pass Trail in Banff National Park, Alberta, and a Canadian tiger swallowtail from the Spirit Trail in the Columbia Valley in British Columbia. You could also see moths along the GDT, including these bizarre little geranium plume moths that Ian and I observed congregating on ground cells along the Nigel Pass Trail in Banff National Park, Alberta. Or this cutworm moth that we found, actually we found a lot of them when we were hiking the Skyline Trail in August. And they were just covering the moss campion that was there in Jasper National Park near Big Shovel Pass. And the larvae of these particular moths are a really important food source for grizzly bears. Or you could see a police car moth. This one was on part of the Skyline Trail in Jasper National Park. Or perhaps you'll see the spear-marked and white-banded black moth, this one on a Sitka valerian by the Healy Pass Trail in Banff National Park. One often just sees the larvae or caterpillars of moths. Here are some examples. A caterpillar of the spotted tussock moth in Akamina-Kishinina Provincial Park, British Columbia. Two ugly nest caterpillar moth larvae along Upper Waterton Lake in Waterton Lakes National Park, Alberta. A bed straw hawk moth caterpillar along the Summit Lake Trail in Waterton Lakes National Park, Alberta. And this one's interesting. It feeds on fireweed leaves, so it tends to become really numerous after a forest fire. And anyone who knows Waterton knows they had the big Kino fire in 2017. And we saw a lot of these particular caterpillars around when we were hiking on the GDT in the years after that. And a fuzzy black caterpillar of a tiger moth on the Roe Lakes Trail in Waterton Lakes National Park. The common aspen leaf miner or aspen serpentine leaf miner is a tiny moth whose larvae have a big appetite. The larvae feed on trembling aspen and balsam poplar leaves, devouring the contents of the epidermal cells while leaving the photosynthetic tissue of the mesophyll intact. Only a small subset of leaf mining insects feed this way, allowing the tree to still photosynthesize, make food for itself. And you will likely see evidence of aspen serpentine leaf miner moth larvae in the aspens and poplars along the GDT. Hymenoptera is a large order of insects comprising bees and wasps, ants, and sawflies. Species of all these groups live in the vicinity of the Great Divide. Females typically have a special ovipositor for inserting eggs into hosts or places that are otherwise inaccessible. This ovipositor is often modified into a stinger. The young develop through complete metamorphosis. That is, they have a worm-like larva stage and an inactive pupal stage before they reach adulthood. The most primitive group, the sawflies, are herbivorous. Many of the other groups are predatory, feeding their young with meat, usually of other insects. Some groups provision their young with pollen, and many adults take nectar. In many of the groups in this order, the larvae parasitize other insects. Despite their name, sawflies are not true flies. They are wasp-like insects within the order Hymenoptera, more primitive than wasps, bees, and ants. The common name comes from the saw-like appearance of the ovipositor, which the females use to cut into the plants where they lay their eggs. Adult sawflies lack a wasp waist and instead have a broad connection between their abdomen and thorax. Most species eat plant material, so things like pollen, nectar, honeydew, and sap. A few species parasitize or feed on other invertebrates. They don't sting or bite. Unlike the grub-like larvae of bees, wasps, and ants, sawfly larvae look more like the caterpillars of moths and butterflies. They feed on their plant host, sometimes causing major defoliation, as in the case of the birch leaf miner. You will see the bright red galls of the willow apple gall sawfly all along the GDT, wherever there are willows. Do not mistake these galls for red berries. If you bite into them, there will be sawfly larvae inside. Yuck. In terms of wasps, while many are harmless, like the lobe mason wasp in the upper left corner, you should be wary of the crown nesting yellow jackets. If you step on or otherwise disturb the nest, they will attack and sting. If you are stung, find a yarrow plant, chew the leaves, and place the green mush on the sting. It'll take the sting away. You can also put afterbite on the area or immerse it in an icy stream, or place snow or ice on it. Whatever you do, take an antihistamine as soon as possible. You should carry afterbite and antihistamines in your first aid kit while on the GDT. Paper wasps, whose nests you might see in a tree or on the ground, are generally not quite as aggressive as yellow jackets. They rarely sting unless they perceive you threaten their nest. However, hornets also build paper nests, and it is wise to give them a wide berth if you see one. You will notice bees buzzing around the many wildflowers along the GDT. You are most likely to see bumblebees as well as other native bees. Only when you are near towns would you see the domestic honeybee, which is not a native species in Canada. Clockwise from the upper left are the mining bee, this one in Waterton Lakes National Park, Alberta, the yellow-fronted bumblebee, this one from Healy Pass in Banff National Park, Alberta, the metallic sweat bee, this one from Waterton Lakes National Park, Alberta, and the yellowish cuckoo bumblebee from Kootenay National Park, BC. Ants are classified in the same order as sawflies, wasps, and bees, the Hymenoptera, whose name refers to this order's two sets of fused membranous wings. However, only virgin queen ants and males grow and bear wings for their mating ritual. They are called alates when they are at this winged phase of their life cycle. Once a queen successfully mates, she sheds her wings and heads off to find a suitable place to lay her eggs and start a new colony. If she does not find a mate within 2 weeks, she dies. Ants are known as social insects, since they live in colonies containing thousands and even millions of highly organized and coordinated individuals with distinct roles and responsibilities. Ants also are known as social insects, and that is because they share resources and demonstrate cooperative behavior, both in terms of trying to move food back to the nest and in terms of defending their colony. Worldwide, ants are recognized as important ecosystem engineers that affect nutrient cycling, soil structure, seed dispersal, and the populations of many other invertebrates, including many defoliating insect pests. They are incredibly numerous and move a great deal of soil in the Rocky Mountain forest ecosystems, far more than do earthworms. There are 4 endemic species of ants, meaning they're found only in Alberta, all restricted to the Rocky Mountain area. I don't have pictures of those species because they're quite rare, but here are 4 of the more common ant species you are more likely to be able to observe along the GDT, particularly in the lower elevation valleys and forested slopes. They include the western thatching ant, the Hercules carpenter ant, one of the Fusca group of field ants, and one of the other common field ants, Formica subpolita. Finally, we're at the true flies. True flies have only 1 pair of wings. There are a huge variety of true flies that you will encounter as you hike the GDT. Most will leave you alone, as their main concern is getting nectar and plant juices from wildflowers, and in the process serving as important pollinators. Such is the case with the harmless meadow fly, a type of hoverfly whose markings mimic those of bees to discourage predators. Don't worry if they land on you seeking salt from your perspiration. They cannot and will not bite or sting. Continuing clockwise from the hoverfly is a bristlefly, which parasitizes caterpillars of moths that defoliate native trees, shrubs, and forbs. And then there's the siphonia fly, which pollinates wildflowers and parasitizes yellow jacket wasps. And lastly, the harmless winter midges that just hang around in groups and do not bite, unlike the infamous Scottish midges. Some midges, some species of midges, lay their eggs on members of the willow family. When the eggs hatch, the light orange larvae bore through the base of the leaves into the cavity of the growing points on the shrubs. Feeding by the larva stimulates the formation of a hard pine cone-like gall. The larva remains inside the gall until they reach maturity, either in the fall or the next spring, when they burrow out and fly away. Although this is a form of parasitism, it is fairly benign and does not seriously harm the shrub. While the majority of fly species do not feed on humans at all, the insects you will likely be most concerned about on the GDT are the biting flies. These include certain species of mosquitoes, horseflies, deer flies, which are actually small houseflies with banded wings, black flies, and no-see-ums, or biting midges. Only the females of the true flies bite. They need a blood meal in order to develop some of their eggs, although many do not need a blood meal to mature their first batch of eggs in the spring. Males have enormous eyes that cover most of their head, and when not feeding on plant nectar, they hover over hilltops, waiting for females to visit. Mosquitoes tend to be most active at dawn and dusk and near areas of still water, especially marshy areas. Horseflies and deer flies are active during hot, still days and quite often in the beautiful wildflower meadows. Black flies and no-see-ums tend not to be an issue until you get to Jasper National Park, and then from then on north, they can be quite a nuisance. In terms of what to do about fly species, usually while you are hiking or backpacking, especially if you are wearing long sleeve shirts and long pants, biting flies won't bother you. Windswept ridges are the best places to avoid the flies. You are more likely to encounter biting flies in the valleys, especially near water, and particularly in the evenings. Certain campsites are notorious for mosquitoes until mid-August, by which time the first frosts hit the alpine and kill off most of the biting flies. It's a good idea to bring protective clothing, including hats with bug nets, and to use insect repellent. There is a wide array of insect repellent available, from citronella and other natural repellents to the very toxic DEET. Citronella works better against mosquitoes and black flies, and smidge against no-see-ums. There are even sunscreen insect repellent creams that are especially effective against horseflies and deer flies. Dragonflies and damselflies are not true flies. They are what are called odonates. They are extremely agile flyers and effective predators, especially of biting flies. I once had a dragonfly capture a big biting horsefly right off my arm while I was hiking. They are one of the larger types of insects you are likely to see along the GDT, particularly when you are near water. Many characteristics distinguish odonates from other groups of insects. They have minute antennae, extremely large eyes that fill most of the head, 2 pairs of transparent membranous wings with many small veins, a long, slender abdomen, an aquatic larval stage or nymph, and prehensile extendable jaws underneath the head. While both dragonflies and damselflies share common features, they differ in body shape and wing base size, the way they fly, and what they do with their wings when they are resting. You can't see it in these pictures, but the eye position differs as well, with the eyes of most species of dragonflies nearly touching in the middle, and the eyes of damselflies being widely separated. Odonates are ancient insects. The ancestors of today's species appeared in the fossil record during the Carboniferous period 325 million years ago. 3 other species of flies that are not true flies are nevertheless important food for fish, especially trout that live in the cold, fast-flowing streams near the Great Divide. These are stoneflies, mayflies, and caddisflies. Unlike true flies that these ones have 2 sets of wings and are more closely related to butterflies and moths than to true flies, which just have 1 set of wings. They are often used as bioindicators for river and stream health. The stoneflies and mayflies are especially intolerant of any water pollution. Since these species are important for trout, they have attracted the attention of people who like to catch fish, particularly fly fishers who emulate these species with the flies they tie and cast. Several species of insect have adapted to live on or near glaciers and snowfields, and even on, in, and around the snow during Rocky Mountain winters. Although often called snowflies, they are not true flies. None of them will bite you, so please leave them be if you are lucky enough to see one. You'll notice 2 of them are river flies, the small winter stonefly and the winter caddisfly. There are no winter mayflies, as conditions must be above freezing for the adult mayflies to emerge, hence the name mayflies. They tend to hatch in May, the month of May. The wingless crane flies are particularly interesting. Frequently found in montane forested habitats on snow or in cave systems, these flies are especially adapted for cold environments. As their common name implies, adult snow flies are frequently observed on snow, where it is easy to spot them. But their habitats also include leaf litter under logs and stones, under the snow, in subnivean habitats, or in mammal burrows. They have several fascinating characteristics. Snowflies are distinctive in their appearance, with long, spindly legs. They lack wings, but do possess halteres, organs needed to maintain balance in flight. Their lack of wings might have evolved due to exposure to cold temperatures and wind. Snowflies sometimes self-amputate limbs to prevent ice from spreading from a limb to their core. Adult snowflies don't eat solid food. They drink water containing dissolved nutrients from snowmelt. Maybe this is because their larvae spend their young lives feeding on rodent feces. Last but not least, I will tell you about a very special insect you might observe if you travel on the highest elevation parts of the GDT, especially from autumn to spring. This is a northern rock crawler, whose scientific name means cricket cockroach. Rock crawlers arose from winged ancestors in the Permian period 250 million years ago. These primitive, omnivorous insects are nocturnal predators and scavengers. They actively search for small invertebrate prey, venturing onto snowfields, foraging for insect fallout carried and deposited by wind. They also eat carrion, detritus, moss, and other plant material. Each adult is about 30 millimeters long, so just over an inch, and a honey beige color. They can be quite long-lived for an insect, living up to 7 to 10 years. However, please don't pick one up if you see it, as the heat from your hand could kill it. Their temperature window is really narrow. They prefer temperatures between 0 and and 3 degrees Celsius, although they can tolerate temperatures of 10 to 20 degrees Celsius for very short periods. The first specimen known to science was discovered in Banff National Park in 1913, high on the side of Sulphur Mountain. And this species is the official insect of the Entomological Society of Canada, and it appears on the ESC's crest. To wrap up this webinar, I'll share a few thoughts on what we can all do to appreciate and safeguard nature on the Great Divide, both on and off the trail. There are many excellent field guides that you can use to identify the flora and fauna of the Canadian Rockies. There are getting to be more insect identification guides, especially of butterflies and moths. The iNaturalist app is quite useful for identifying arthropods, especially certain insects and spiders, although you cannot always trust the artificial intelligence identifications. Although iNaturalist is very consumptive of iPhone resources, there are measures you can take to avoid this. It is a really good idea to download iNaturalist and to record your observations on it, as this improves our collective understanding of which species are where and when, including invasive alien arthropods. One of the most important things you can do as a GDT hiker is to help safeguard nature during your trip by adhering to no trace backcountry travel principles. Just type in no trace backcountry principles in your browser and read the material under each of the 7 principles before you go. And I'll just point out some things you can do to avoid polluting the Great Divide waters. To prevent polluting the waters of the Great Divide area, be sure to wash off any insect repellent and sunscreen before you jump in an alpine lake or stream in areas outside the mountain national parks where you're still allowed to swim. Better yet, use a portable shower and or a thermos to keep yourself clean at camp. Wash your dishes and do your evening and morning ablutions with water that you take from the nearby water source away from that water source. Never defecate or urinate near water sources. In case someone else did do that, always filter the water you plan to use for drinking. Next to habitat destruction and fragmentation, invasive alien species are the major threat to biodiversity. You can do your part to prevent the spread of invasive alien species into the Great Divide area, particularly the terrestrial area. A key action is to clean your hiking boots and other gear before and after you hike the GDT. And also, I know that the GDTA is really good about cleaning the tools that they use, because that's one thing. You can transfer the eggs of different plant parasites, arthropod plant parasites from one tree to another if you are not cleaning tools. And so it's a good idea to really clean things up before and after any of the work parties. Another thing you can do is never bring firewood from outside the Great Divide area to a campground in the Rockies. If you fish, don't move fishing bait species from one area to another or release those bait species. That's how that crayfish got into the Bow Lake area. Take pictures of any species you suspect are alien invasive species and post the pictures on iNaturalist after your trip. And report any confirmed sightings of alien invasive species to Parks Canada. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency has restricted the movement of all ash tree material, including tree nursery stock, tree trunks with bark attached, limbs, twigs, etc., and firewood in and out of the areas affected by the emerald ash borer. Moving infected hemlock saplings or hemlock wood poses a similar risk of spreading the hemlock woolly adelgid. So please don't move firewood. Buy local, burn local. Aquatic plants and animals that are not native to Canada can become aquatic invasive species if they are released into our waters. These aquatic invasive species can harm our environment, economy, and society. Under the federal aquatic invasive species regulations, it is illegal to introduce an aquatic species into any body of water where it is not native unless authorized by a federal, provincial, or territorial law. You can help prevent the introduction and spread of aquatic invasive species yourself by never releasing aquarium pets, water, garden plants, live food, or live bait into rivers, streams, lakes, ponds, or even storm sewers. Sport fish may only be released back into the waters from which they were caught, i.e. the catch and release method, and never move from one water body to another. Other general measures to prevent the introduction and spread of aquatic invasive species include learning about them, including how to recognize them, and cleaning, draining, and drying any equipment used in the water before storing it or moving it to a different body of water. That concludes my summary of the arthropod fauna of the Great Divide area. The next two videos will help you identify the vertebrate animals you are most likely to see, hear, or find evidence of along the GDT. Vertebrates include fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Join me for the next video in this series, which on the fauna of the Great Divide, which will focus on the fish, reptile, amphibians, and birds that you could see while hiking the GDT. If you have questions after listening to this video about the arthropods that live in the vicinity of the Great Divide, please put them in the YouTube comments along with your contact information. And happy trails.